In 1908, a rancher was riding along an arroyo on his property near Folsom, New Mexico. As he was crossing the embankment, the man stumbled upon what looked like large embedded bones, which were later confirmed to have belonged to large Ice Age mammals such as gigantic bisons and mammoths. And though that alone made them an invaluable find, what truly set them apart were ancient human-made cut marks, a pivotal discovery paving way for the recognition of an ancient people called Clovis. New excavations further cemented the Clovis culture's primacy in the Americas starting around 13,000 years ago, establishing it as the undisputed icon of initial human arrival and expansion across both continents. However, after holding this title for most of the 20th century, later archaeological digs made the so-called Clovis-first explanation seem untenable. So what changed? Who were the first people that actually reached the New World, and more importantly, how did they do it? To early modern humans, the late Pleistocene, a dynamic period characterized by extensive glacial cycles, lower sea levels, and new intercontinental routes, was a time of exploration. Approximately 13,000 years ago, with ice sheets in retreat, a distinct culture of them made a daring journey across a former land bridge connecting Asia and the Americas known as Beringia. They were called Clovis after a place by such a name in New Mexico, where stone points have been discovered by an amateur archaeologist James Virgilio Whiteman in 1929. Having reached present-day Alaska, they passed through an interior ice-free corridor in western Canada and spread further south, rapidly migrating across both continents in a few centuries and becoming their first inhabitants. Or at least that is what scholars believe to be true for decades. A new breakthrough was made in the mid-1970s when archaeologist James Adevasio and his team were investigating sediment layers in western Pennsylvania. Together they discovered a rock shelter known as Meadowcroft, which turned out to be a pre-Clovis era settlement containing remains of the earliest known fire pit and a stone tool later dated to 16,000 years ago. This sparked an intense controversy and urged scientists to search for other signs of pre-Clovis activity across the Americas. The Clovis-first theory started to unravel in the late 1980s as new archaeological evidence for the late Pleistocene seafaring as well as maritime colonization of Ryukyu Islands and Bismarck Archipelago was found. In the 1990s, tension surrounding its research reached a new boiling point, with archaeological conspiracy theorists accusing opponents of actively suppressing its progress and calling them Clovis Mafia. By 1997, following 2 decades of excavations and extensive documentation by Professor Tom Dullahay and his colleagues at the Monteverde site, leading scientific journals started claiming that Clovis-first is no longer fit for purpose. In the same year, archaeologists James Adevasio and David Pedler proclaimed, quote, "The outcome of the Monteverde site visit and attendant discussion was unanimous. All agreed that the site's MV1 component represents a genuine human occupation in primary depositional context dated a minimum of 1,000 years before the accepted benchmark for the initial peopling of the Americas. The Clovis curtain has fallen." This eventually culminated into Clovis Conference of 1999, which examined a series of opinion papers harshly criticizing the Clovis-first advocates and helped reach a favorable consensus concerning pre-Clovis the next year. And while proponents of pre-Clovis continued to face pushback over their works, new studies continued pushing Clovis-first theory by the wayside. In 2016, an article examining radiocarbon dates from the former ice-free corridor confirmed that it was not a feasible route for early human crossings. This conclusion was further solidified by a 2022 study examining 64 rock samples gathered from present-day Alberta and British Columbia, the area where Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets likely separated. Using a method known as cosmogenic nuclide exposure dating, researchers proved that the ice sheet corridor did not open around 13,800 years ago, after people had already populated North America. More direct traces of pre-Clovis also came in the form of footprints found in White Sands National Park, New Mexico, dated in a 2021 study to be between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. These finds had led many to abandon Clovis-first entirely, putting an end to the academic warfare that lasted for nearly 3/4 of a century. And so, the obscure identity of pre-Clovis cemented itself in scientific discourse, describing a variety of human populations associated with the possible arrival and colonization of the Americas around 16,000 years ago. The origins of these early people are shrouded in mystery, as their inhabited sites are yet to yield any human skeletal remains for ancient DNA extraction. That said, Paisley 5 Mile Cave, southeast Oregon, produced DNA from fossilized human feces predating 14,000 years ago, which indicates them being related to Eurasians. Currently, their known inhabited area stretches from western Canada to southern Chile, with sites dating earlier than approximately 13,300 years ago marking their disappearance. Some of the most reliably attributed sites documenting pre-Clovis occupation between 15 and 14,000 years ago include Tricky Island in Canada, Paisley Caves in the United States, Huaca Prieta in Peru, Monteverde in Chile, as well as Arroyo Seco and Piedra Museo in Argentina. Unlike in the case of most Clovis finds, pre-Clovis lithic technological traits include burn spalls, discoidal core reduction, and intentionally radially fractured bifaces. The latter, including those possessing a laurel leaf form, are low-shouldered and have distinctive manufacturing marks or flake scar patterns. Pre-Clovis peoples were hunters and are also believed to have produced prismatic blades from prepared quartzite cores and small pentagonal bifaces. Their prey were proboscideans, mainly mammoths and mastodons, as suggested by bone sites found across the region. Other possibly hunted animals found in pre-Clovis assemblages were a now extinct genus of camel known as camelops, as well as members of the horse family also known as equids. A well-preserved ancient shelter at Monteverde shows that these people had fire pits with charcoal from luma, a type of wood able to burn for prolonged periods of time. There they also constructed tents using flexible maki for poles, the tops of which were then tied together with knots of reeds. While hypotheses like climate change or overkill are traditionally seen as the main culprits behind extinctions following the last ice age, it is unclear what actually led pre-Clovis peoples to their downfall. Geobiologist Ellen Whitney Smith hypothesizes that second-order predation might be to blame, as they reduce carnivore populations to diminish competition, leading to a boom and subsequent bust of herbivores. Regardless, perhaps the most enduring question remains to be their migration route across the Americas, and for a good reason. Monteverde, one of the oldest known sites in the Americas, is also the southernmost, even though the first Americans were traditionally assumed to have arrived from Asia via Beringia. And, as noted by Michael Waters, their migration by land is impossible because in places like Texas or Idaho, humans are found to have lived at 16,000 years ago, whereas the earliest inland corridor appeared only 14,300 years ago. Such discrepancies prompted scientists to look for new approaches to the migration problem and theorize that pre-Clovis peoples most likely made it into the Americas by boating down the Pacific coast. Pioneered by Canadian archaeologist Knut Fedmark in 1979, the coastal migration hypothesis started gaining greater support in the 1990s, and limitations of ice-free corridor explanation became increasingly apparent. Their immigration route most likely led along the southern coast of then-dry Bering Shelf, the Aleutian Island arc, and the shoreline of British Columbia. This migration model is not without its shortcomings, as scientists are yet to discover any sites older than 13,200 years ago along the entire coast from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. Nonetheless, As Todd Brahe and his team conclude, quote, "Archaeological investigations of submerged Pacific coast landscapes have just begun, and it may be many years before we have a better resolution of the history of human occupation of Pacific coast paleolandscapes. Although the continental shelf of the eastern Pacific has yet to yield the same type of underwater discoveries as the Gulf of Mexico or Florida's inland waters, scientists are building a strong case for early human coastal occupation." The main mission of this channel is to provide mind-opening content that demystifies perplexing topics, challenges conventional ideas, and deepens our sense of awe for the past, one video at a time. If you enjoyed this episode and would love to learn more about the ancient human world and its fascinating legacy, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.